king's impossible choice. He ordered a baby to be cut in half. What the true mother did next changed history forever. Solomon ben David stood before the ornate throne of Israel, the weight of a kingdom pressing down on shoulders too young for such burden. The crown felt heavy, foreign, a constant reminder of the giant shadow his father had cast. At just 20 years old, Solomon had inherited not just a kingdom, but the expectations of a nation. How could he possibly fill the sandals of King David, warrior and poet, beloved of God? The whispers in court grew louder with each passing day. Too young, they said. Too inexperienced, they muttered behind cupped hands. On the 7th night after his coronation, Solomon knelt alone in the newly constructed temple. Marble columns stretched toward the heavens, gold fixtures catching the last light of day. "Lord," he whispered, his voice echoing in the sacred space, "I am but a child. I do not know how to go out or come in." His hands trembled as he pressed them against the cool stone floor. That night, as sleep finally claimed him, Solomon dreamed. Not the usual fractured images of youth, but something different, something divine. God appeared to him, voice like thunder, yet gentle as morning dew. "Ask what I shall give you," the voice commanded. Solomon could have asked for wealth beyond measure, for victory over his enemies, that for a life stretched long into comfortable old age. Instead, what he requested shocked heaven itself. "Give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people," he said, "that I may discern between good and evil." God was pleased. More than pleased, delighted. "Because you have asked for wisdom instead of long life or riches, I will give you a wise and understanding heart like no one has ever had before or will ever have again." Solomon woke with the echo of divine promise still ringing in his ears. But promises, even heavenly ones, require testing. And that test would come sooner than he expected, in the form of 2 women and 1 living child. What would you have done in Solomon's position? If God offered you anything in the world, what would you ask for? Drop your answers in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of ancient wisdom. They stood before him trembling, these women from the edges of society, one with eyes red-rimmed from endless tears, the other's face a mask of practiced indignation. Between them, swaddled tightly against the morning chill, a baby, no more than 3 months old, slept peacefully, unaware of the storm raging around his tiny existence. "This woman and I live in the same house," the first woman began, voice raw with emotion. "I gave birth to a beautiful son, and 3 days later, she also delivered a baby boy." Her words tumbled out faster now, desperate to be believed. "During the night, she rolled over on her infant son and smothered him. While I slept, she took my living son from my arms and placed her dead child at my side." The second woman lunged forward, face contorted with rage. "Lies! The living child is mine, and the dead one is hers." Guards stepped forward, restraining both women as they hurled accusations across the throne room. The baby woke, tiny fists punching the air as his cries joined the chaos. Solomon raised his hand. Silence fell immediately, thick and expectant. Court officials exchanged nervous glances. This was the moment, the first real test of the new king's judgment. How could anyone determine the truth? There were no witnesses, no evidence beyond contradicting testimonies. Solomon's gaze fell on the child, then back to the women's faces, one etched with grief, the other with determination. Both convincing. Both possibly lying. The young king closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something had changed in his expression. "Bring me a sword," he commanded. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A servant approached, bearing a gleaming blade that caught the morning light streaming through high windows. Solomon pointed to the living child with an unsettling calm. "Cut the living child in 2 and give half to one and half to the other." The court froze in horror. Had their young king lost his mind? Was this the wisdom God had promised? The second woman's face hardened as she nodded. "Let it be neither mine nor yours. Divide it." But the first woman fell to her knees, face ashen. "Please, my lord," she begged, voice breaking, "give her the living child. Don't kill him." Her entire body shook with the force of her plea. In that moment, she would rather lose her son to another than see him harmed. Solomon's eyes softened as he looked upon the kneeling woman. He gestured toward her. "Give the living child to her, and by no means kill him. She is his mother." What qualities make a truly wise leader? Have you ever seen someone make a difficult judgment that revealed the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. News of Solomon's judgment spread through Jerusalem like wildfire, then beyond, to villages and distant provinces, to neighboring kingdoms and lands across the sea. They spoke of the young king who could see into human hearts, who could untangle the most twisted knots of human deception. The true mother took her child home that day, cradling him close as she whispered promises of protection against his downy head. The other woman disappeared into the shadows of Jerusalem, her name lost to history, her desperate gamble a cautionary tale. But for Solomon, this was only the beginning. People began bringing their disputes to him, complex family feuds, property disagreements, accusations of wrongdoing with no witnesses. Each judgment he rendered seemed to contain some spark of divine insight that left onlookers in awe. Foreign dignitaries arrived at court, bearing gifts and questions designed to test this legendary wisdom. The Queen of Sheba herself journeyed from her wealthy kingdom, bringing caravans laden with gold and spices, determined to prove the stories false. Surely, she told her advisors, no man can be as wise as they claim. She presented Solomon with riddles that had stumped her own sages, with questions about creation that had no easy answers. For each, Solomon offered responses that left her speechless. After many days of testing, she stood before his throne and bowed her head. "Not even half of your wisdom was reported to me," she admitted. "You exceed the fame I heard." Yet wisdom, even God-given wisdom, does not guarantee a perfect life. As years passed and Solomon's fame and wealth grew, so too did his compromises. 300 wives and 700 concubines, most for political alliances, slowly turned his heart away from the God who had blessed him. He built temples for foreign gods alongside the temple of the Lord. He imposed heavy taxes and forced labor on his people to fund his magnificent buildings and lavish lifestyle. The whispers in court returned, now tinged with discontent rather than doubt. Late in his life, on a night much like the one where he'd first asked for wisdom, Solomon again knelt alone in the temple. His beard had long since turned gray, his shoulders now bent from decades of bearing a crown. "Was it enough?" he whispered to the silence. "To know right from wrong, but still choose wrong so many times." In his final years, Solomon wrote words of reflection that would outlast his golden palaces. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," he concluded, understanding at last that wisdom without obedience is merely clever emptiness. That knowledge without love becomes its own kind of foolishness. When he died, Solomon left behind a kingdom poised on the edge of division, a temple that stood as testimony to both faith and compromise, and writings that would guide seekers of wisdom for thousands of years to come. His story reminds us that wisdom is not merely about making clever judgments, but about recognizing the source of true understanding. She was pronounced dead before anyone could help her. What Jesus did next left everyone speechless. In a small town near the Sea of Galilee, where dust settled on windowsills and hope often felt as scarce as rain, lived Jairus, a respected synagogue leader with graying temples and shoulders that carried the weight of both tradition and community expectation. His position demanded perfection, unwavering faith, absolute dedication to the laws that governed their lives. But there are moments when a father's heart shatters every carefully constructed wall of position and propriety. His daughter, his only daughter, just 12 years old, lay dying in their home. Her fever burned through the night like wildfire, her breathing growing shallower with each passing hour. The physicians had come and gone, leaving only bitter herbs and sympathetic glances in their wake. Jairus had tried everything. Nothing worked. And then he heard about the teacher from Nazareth, the one they called Jesus, the one whose hands, they said, could make the blind see and the lame walk. The one the religious leaders, men like Jairus himself, had warned against. Dangerous, they called him, a blasphemer. But when your daughter's breath grows fainter with each rise and fall of her chest, blasphemy seems a small price to pay for one more chance. The crowds pressed against Jesus like waves against the shore when Jairus found him. Men and women desperate for healing, for hope, for something to believe in beyond their suffering. Jairus pushed through them all, his position forgotten, his dignity abandoned. When he reached Jesus, he fell to his knees, dust clinging to his fine robes. "My daughter," he gasped, looking up into the face of the man who might be his salvation or his downfall. "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." The words tumbled out broken and raw, a father's plea stripped of everything but desperation. Jesus looked at him with compassion. Without hesitation, he nodded and followed. "Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want more powerful stories like this." They hadn't gone far when a woman, thin, hunched, eyes darting nervously, reached out from the crowd and touched the edge of Jesus' cloak. 12 years of bleeding had left her empty, both of blood and hope. Jesus stopped, turned. "Who touched me?" he asked. The disciples exchanged confused glances. In such a crowd, everyone was touching everyone. But Jesus waited. The woman fell at his feet, trembling, confessing everything. "Daughter," Jesus said gently, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Jairus stood frozen, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every moment Jesus delayed was another moment his daughter's life slipped away. And then, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, came a voice Jairus recognized. One of his household servants, face grave, eyes avoiding his. "Your daughter is dead," the man said bluntly. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of finality through Jairus' body. Too late. They were too late. Jairus felt his legs weaken, his vision blur, but before he could collapse into the dust, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Strong, steady. "Don't be afraid," Jesus said, his voice low but firm. "Just believe." Believe what? That death could be undone? That loss could be reversed? Yet something in Jesus' eyes made Jairus straighten his shoulders, made him nod silently, made him continue the journey home. Outside his house, the mourning had already begun. Professional wailers raised their voices in rhythmic laments. Neighbors gathered with sympathetic murmurs. Jesus surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. "Why all this commotion and wailing?" he asked. "The child is not dead, but asleep." Laughter erupted, harsh and mocking. How dare he? Didn't he see the pallor of death already settling on the girl's skin? Have you ever held on to hope when everyone else had given up? Tell us your story in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more content like this. Jesus didn't argue. He simply asked everyone to leave. Then, with only Jairus, his wife, and 3 of his closest followers, Peter, James, and John, he entered the room where the girl lay. The chamber was silent now, heavy with the smell of oils they'd prepared for burial. Jesus approached the bed slowly. The girl lay still, her skin pale as milk, her small hands arranged carefully at her sides. He took her hand in his, the warm flesh of the living holding the cold flesh of the dead. "Talikum," he said. The Aramaic words hung in the air. "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And then, a flutter of eyelashes against pale cheeks, a twitch of fingers within Jesus' grasp, a soft intake of breath, like someone surfacing from deep water. The girl opened her eyes, blinking in confusion at the circle of stunned faces above her. She sat up, looking around as if waking from an ordinary nap. "Give her something to eat," Jesus said practically, breaking the trance that had fallen over the room. Jairus couldn't move. He pushed forward, gathering their daughter into her arms. The girl, bewildered but alive, hugged her back. "Tell no one about this," Jesus instructed, his voice gentle but firm. "Tell no one? How could they not tell everyone?" Yet something in his eyes made Jairus nod. What moment in your life seemed impossible until it happened? Share with us in the comments. Later that night, when the excitement had quieted, Jairus sat alone in the courtyard of his home. What did it mean, he wondered, to witness such a thing? What did it mean for his position, his faith, his understanding of the world? He never spoke publicly about what happened that day, honoring the request for silence. But he lived it, every day, in the way he led with compassion rather than judgment. For Jairus, the miracle was never just about his daughter's return to life. It was about his own awakening, to a faith beyond formulas, to a God who wasn't confined to temples or texts, to the truth that sometimes the most sacred act is simply falling to your knees in the dust, all pretense abandoned, and asking for help. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Capernaum as Jesus and his small band of followers made their way toward the synagogue. The air hung heavy with heat, the scent of baking bread mingling with the tang of fish from the nearby Sea of Galilee. But for one tortured soul huddled in the shadows of the synagogue walls, there would be no rest today. Jesus walked with purpose, his sandaled feet raising small clouds of dust with each step. 4 fishermen followed close behind: Simon, Andrew, James, and John, their calloused hands still smelling faintly of fish scales and salt water. Inside the synagogue, people gathered in hushed conversation: merchants, craftsmen, ordinary people seeking guidance, seeking hope in uncertain times. The man in the corner watched, his body rigid, his eyes darting frantically across the room like trapped birds. Jesus took his place before the congregation. Unlike the scribes who quoted endlessly from each other, Jesus spoke differently. His words carried a weight and authority that silenced even the most learned men. "The time is fulfilled," he told them, his voice filling every corner of the room. "The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news." The crowd leaned forward, drawn by the certainty in his voice, the fire behind his gentle eyes, all except the man in the shadows. With each word Jesus spoke, he seemed to shrink further into himself, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool interior of the stone building. Then Jesus paused. His gaze swept across the room like a searchlight, coming to rest on the tormented man. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, compassion meeting agony across the crowded synagogue. The man's body went rigid, his face contorted in anguish. "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth?" The voice that tore from his throat was not his own. It was deeper, colder, layered with other voices beneath it. "Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The synagogue erupted in gasps and murmurs. Parents pulled children behind them. The possessed man's body began to tremble violently, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. But Jesus didn't retreat, didn't call for guards or herbs or restraints. Instead, he stepped forward, his face set with determination, and "Be silent." Jesus commanded, voice calm but firm as iron. "Come out of him." The words hung in the air like lightning before the thunder. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The man screamed, a sound of rage and agony that echoed off the synagogue walls. His body convulsed, thrown to the ground by an invisible force. The crowd pressed back against the walls, with mothers covering their children's eyes. For a terrible moment, it seemed the man might die there. What do you think this story reveals about the nature of evil and how it should be confronted? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful biblical narratives. Slowly, he pushed himself up on trembling arms. His eyes, clear now, bewildered but present, scanned the room in confusion. Tears cut clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "What happened?" he whispered, his own voice restored. "Who am I now?" Amazement rippled through the synagogue like wind through wheat. "What is this?" they asked one another, voices hushed with wonder and fear. "A new teaching, with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Some began to weep. Others fell to their knees in prayer. Still others backed away. Simon Peter watched his new teacher with widening eyes. The fishermen had seen nets break under the weight of unexpected catches. The foundations of Peter's world shifted beneath his feet like sand. Have you ever felt like you were fighting against forces beyond your control? How does this ancient story of liberation connect with our modern struggles for freedom? Share your experiences in the comments and hit subscribe for more stories that bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary challenges. A week later, the freed man stood among a crowd gathered by the lakeshore, listening as Jesus taught from a borrowed fishing boat. The press of people had grown too great for the synagogue, too controversial for its elders' comfort. So Jesus spoke on the shore. The man felt a tug at his robe and looked down to find his daughter at his side, his son and wife just behind. They had been cautious about joining him, worried about the crowds, the memories, the possibility of darkness lingering in places where power confronted power. But they had come anyway, drawn by the hope that had taken root where despair once ruled. "Is that him?" his son asked, pointing to the figure in the boat. "The one who saved you?" The man knelt down, meeting his child's eyes with clear ones of his own, the greatest gift he could offer after years of madness. "Yes," he said simply, "that's him." His daughter leaned against him, small fingers tracing a scar on his wrist. His wife's hand rested on his shoulder, solid and real. Together, they listened as Jesus spoke of a kingdom unlike any they had imagined. The words washed over the crowd like the gentle waves against the shore. But for the man who had been freed in the synagogue, they were confirmation of what he had experienced in his very body and soul, that no darkness, however ancient or powerful, could withstand the authority of true light. And that knowledge, that lived experience of liberation, was something no demon, no empire, and no fear could ever take away. "Lower me down to him," the paralyzed man whispered to his friends. "I believe he can heal what medicine cannot." The crowd outside the modest home in Capernaum had swelled beyond capacity. Hundreds pressed against each other, straining to hear the words of the carpenter-turned-teacher who spoke of impossible things, of a kingdom not built by human hands, of healing that defied physicians, of forgiveness that erased shame. Micah lay on his mat at the edge of town, where he had lain for 12 years. Since the accident at the quarry, his legs had become strangers to him. Lifeless extensions he dragged like punishment. Every sunrise was an act of endurance, every evening prayer unanswered, until whispers of the Nazarene reached him. They said he touched lepers and they were clean. They said he spoke to storms and they listened. "You're mad," said Elias, the strongest of Micah's 4 friends. "The crowd is impenetrable." But Micah's eyes, the only part of him that still held fire, locked onto Elias. "Then we make a way," he said. "Or do you believe in nothing greater than the barriers before you?" Something stirred in Elias then, not pity, which Micah had endured enough of, but something rarer. Respect. Jude, the skeptic among them, shook his head. "Even if we get you there, what then? This Jesus may be a great teacher, but flesh and bone don't heal at words." Micah smiled faintly. "Then I will have tried everything in this world, and you will have been a true friend, carrying a fool to his final disappointment." The frankness pierced Jude's doubt. He nodded slowly. They lifted him, as they had countless times before. Elias and Jude at his shoulders, Benjamin and Nahum at his feet. Through dusty streets they carried him, their determination growing with each step. When they rounded the corner, hope faltered. Hundreds stood packed around a small home, pressing inward like a living wall. "It's impossible," Benjamin whispered, but Micah's eyes had moved upward, to the flat roof. "Not impossible," he said, "just difficult." The realization spread among them like fire catching dry grass. Elias spoke first. "The roof." Nahum, the builder among them, nodded slowly. "Clay tiles. We could remove them, create an opening." Jude frowned. "And desecrate someone's home?" Micah looked at his useless legs. "I will repay the owner everything," he said, "even if I must work from this mat for years more." Have you ever felt so desperate for change that normal solutions seem inadequate? Have you ever been willing to tear the roof off your problems to find healing? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge your perspective. The climb was treacherous. They fashioned a crude harness for Micah from their belts and outer robes. "Trust us," Benjamin said. Micah nodded. "With my life." The pain was excruciating as they hoisted him, but his eyes never left the roof above. For the first time in years, he was moving upward, not lying flat. On the roof, Nahum assessed the tiles, finding the spot directly above where the teacher's voice emanated. "Here," he whispered. Their hands worked feverishly, removing clay tiles one by one. The hole grew larger until finally they could see inside. Jesus sat in the center of the room, surrounded by eager listeners. His face was kind but weary. Micah felt sudden doubt. Who was he to interrupt? But it was too late for second thoughts. His friends positioned the mat over the opening. Eyes met, breaths held, then they began lowering him down. The room fell silent as dust and daylight spilled from above. Faces turned upward in confusion, then amazement as they realized a man was being lowered. The descent seemed eternal to Micah. What if the teacher was angry? What if he refused? What if this final, desperate act ended in humiliation? His mat touched the ground directly at Jesus' feet. The ropes slackened. Micah looked up, meeting the gaze of the man he had risked everything to reach. There was no anger there, just eyes that somehow knew everything about Micah's 12 years of paralysis without being told. "Your faith is remarkable," Jesus said softly. Then louder, he spoke words Micah least expected. "Son, your sins are forgiven." Confusion rippled through Micah. He had come for healing, not forgiveness. The scribes in the corner began whispering angrily. "This is blasphemy," one hissed. "Who can forgive sins but God alone? What would you risk to encounter Jesus? What barriers would you break through?" Share your answer in the comments, and subscribe to join our community of believers who seek deeper understanding. Jesus turned to the scribes, his expression gentle but unwavering. "Why do you question in your hearts? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say stand up and walk?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. "But so that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Jesus turned back to Micah. "I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go home." Micah felt it instantly, warmth flooding his dead limbs, sensation where there had been none. It began at his core and flowed outward like a river finding new channels. His toes curled, his knees flexed, muscles awakened from their 12-year slumber. He gasped, not daring to believe. Then slowly, trembling, he rose. First to his elbows, then to his hands. His back straightened, and then, miracle beyond imagining, to his feet. He stood, swaying slightly, tears streaming down his face. The mat that had been his prison now lay beneath him, unneeded. Then Micah took a step. His foot responded, bearing his weight. Another step. He bent his knees, testing them, then straightened. Jumped slightly, feeling the impact and recovery. 12 years of prayers, concentrated into this moment. He looked up at his friends peering through the hole they had created. "I'm walking," he called up to them, his voice breaking. "I'm walking." If you've ever witnessed a miracle, big or small, we want to hear your story. Was there a moment when the impossible became possible in your life? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith that defy explanation. The crowd erupted, some in praise, some in confusion, all in awe. Micah turned to Jesus, falling to his knees before him, not from weakness now, but in reverence. "Thank you," he whispered. Jesus helped him to his feet. "Your faith has made you well," he said. "Go and tell what God has done for you." Micah gathered his mat, folding it carefully. The crowd parted for him as he walked, truly walked, toward the door. Each step was a revelation, each movement a prayer of gratitude. Outside, his friends waited, still stunned by what they had witnessed. "We destroyed someone's roof," Jude said suddenly, practical even in the face of miracle. Micah nodded. "And I will repair it," he said, "with these hands and these legs that work again." This place of transformation would be sacred to him always. The spot where desperation and faith had torn open a ceiling and found healing waiting below. In the days that followed, Micah made good on his promise. He went to the homeowner and offered restitution. But the man, having heard the full story, simply embraced him. "My house was honored that day," he said. Still, Micah insisted on making repairs with his own hands, placing each tile with reverent precision. As years passed, Micah never forgot the feeling of those ropes lowering him down, the moment when sensation returned to his limbs. When others spoke of barriers to reaching Jesus, he would smile and say, "There is always the roof." It became his life's message, that determination could overcome obstacles, that faith could find unexpected pathways, that healing sometimes required breaking through ceilings. That's the power of desperate faith. It refuses to accept closed doors or impossible situations. It makes openings where none exist. It lowers itself to the feet of the only one who can truly heal. And in doing so, it discovers that no roof is too solid, no barrier too permanent when placed before the hands of the healer.
The man of faith. In the vast and ancient land of Uzi, a man named Job lived a life of honor and devotion. His faith in God was unwavering, and he was known for his righteousness. His home was filled with abundance, vast fields of crops, countless livestock, and a loving family. Prosperity and peace surrounded him. Yet Job remained humble, always giving thanks to the Lord. But far beyond the earthly realm, in the courts of heaven, a great conversation took place. God looked upon his servant Job and declared his righteousness, but Satan, the deceiver, challenged Job's faithfulness. "Does Job fear you for nothing?" Satan sneered. "Take away all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." God allowed Satan to test Job, knowing his servant's faith would endure. Tragedy struck swiftly. Raiders stole Job's livestock, fire consumed his servants, and a mighty wind collapsed his home. His beloved children perished beneath the rubble. Yet, in his grief, Job fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Satan was not satisfied. He struck Job's body with painful sores, covering him from head to toe. Job sat among the ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery. Even his wife, overwhelmed by sorrow, urged him to curse God and die. But Job refused, declaring, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" 3 friends came to comfort him: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. For 7 days they sat in silence, mourning with him. But when they finally spoke, their words carried accusations. They insisted Job must have sinned, for surely suffering was the consequence of wrongdoing. Yet Job held his ground. He longed for an audience with God, to understand his suffering. Though he wrestled with his pain, he never abandoned his faith, proclaiming, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth." Then from the whirlwind God answered. His voice thundered, questioning Job's understanding of the universe's vastness, the mysteries of creation. Humbled, Job repented, acknowledging God's infinite wisdom. In the end, God restored Job's fortunes. His health returned, his flocks multiplied, and he was blessed with children once more. His latter days were more abundant than the former. Job's faith had endured the greatest trials, and in his steadfast trust he found redemption. As Job looked up to the night sky, the stars shimmered above him, a reminder of God's eternal presence. And in that moment, he knew that faith was not about understanding all things, but trusting in the one who does.